Symposium Committee, along with Teresa Jefferson, Angel Truesdale, Brian Garrison, and Jennifer Rundles. I was about to warn you that we were recording this session, so you've been warned that we are recording. The good thing is we will share all these sessions with you after the symposium is over, and we will make those available to all of those who registered. So welcome to today's second session of the Brass Symposium. We're very excited you could join us. We ask that you stay muted during the presentation, and I'm going to be monitoring the chat for questions and hold those for later. Now I'd like to introduce our speakers for this session, Wendy Pothier and Dr. Patty Condon from the University of New Hampshire. And their presentation is Exploring Business Data Literacy Competencies in the ACRL Framework. Wendy and Patty, I'm turning it over to you.
Great, thanks. Can you hear us okay?
Yes.
Wonderful. So welcome to Exploring Business Data Literacy Competencies in the ACRL Framework. Thank you all for attending today, and thank you particularly to the team that organized the symposium. A wonderful job. We appreciate all the work that you put into it. We're excited to discuss with you all today and do some activities based on our proposed baseline business data literacy competencies and outline some of our recent work on how they can be mapped to the ACRL Framework for Information Literacy for Higher Education, heretofore called Framework. I'm Wendy Pothier, Business and Economics Librarian at the University of New Hampshire.
And I'm Patty Condon, the Research Data Services Librarian.
We both use she, her pronouns. In our session today, we're going to explore the connections between data literacy and information literacy, especially in how it relates to library instruction. And as part of that, we're planning to discuss strategies for integrating data literacy, aligning with the framework into our work with business information literacy instruction. So what we're hoping you'll do as we go through our little agenda is log into our Mentimeter, menti.com, and use the code 4108-8223. And we'll start today with a brief introduction, which is what we are doing at the moment. We're going to have a short activity in the Menti, and then we're going to outline the mapping between the competencies and the framework. After that, we'll do a hands-on activity in Jamboard with a facilitated discussion before wrapping up and having a Q&A session. As we project the flow of our session today, we recognize that the facilitated discussion and Q&A will overlap a bit in time. So just so you're aware of the flow. So, and again, to join our Menti for the first activity, please sign in to menti.com.
In a 2019 article, we introduced 7 business data literacy competencies, which we proposed as baseline competencies for business students to help them prepare for entering the workforce and working with data at various levels of the job. The competencies reflect data literacy requirements for working professionals at an entry level or a broad level within an organization, recognizing that greater levels of competency would be developed in areas needed by job type or gained through experience. So in the chat, I have linked to a LibGuide that we created for you in this presentation, and it has a replication of this table that we're presenting here, so you can review the definitions of the competencies as we throughout the presentation. So, building on that work for the 2019 article, we recently mapped the data literacy competencies to the ACRL framework. And today we're going to focus on the mapping of those competencies to the frames. So we conducted this mapping because we wanted to clearly articulate the connections between the data literacy competencies that we proposed and foundation.
Ladies, I can't hear you suddenly.
All right, well, let us know. We'll start this slide over.
Can you hear us now?
A little, not very loud, but I can hear you.
All right, let's
That's better. I can hear suddenly.
Okay.
Okay.
So we'll continue on with this slide. We'll start this slide over.
So building on the work that we did developing the competencies, we mapped those competencies to the ACRL framework. And today we're going to be focusing on that mapping. We conducted this mapping because we wanted to clearly articulate the connections between the proposed competencies and foundational documents in our field. We wanted to help contextualize the conversation around data literacy as complementary to information literacy and in order to help promote greater adoption. Through this work, we provide examples and strategies to help business librarians move the competencies into their practice. And we felt aligning them with the frames could provide a guide for this. By mapping the competencies to the framework, we wanted to normalize data literacy as part of existing library instruction. And we wanted to strengthen the voice of business librarians as key stakeholders in conversations and instruction around data literacy.
So in our first brief activity, we would like you to rank the inner information literacy frames according to the frequency of how you use them within your own instruction. So we're going to use this ranking for our discussion activity that we're going to have at the end of the presentation. So we're delighted to see what you come up with, and then we'll take those results and frame our later activity based on them. So we'll give you a moment to respond. Thank you for your participation. I always enjoy watching the ranking move in real time. I hope you all enjoy it as well. As for waiting, I cannot see how many participants we have in the room, so we'll just give it a few more seconds for folks to weigh in. Oh, looks like we have 76. Thank you, Jenny Lynn.
Oh, we have a pause.
All right. Should have had music playing. Should have taken a cue from our wonderful facilitators for this to have music playing while we asked you to do the activity. So we'll thank you for your feedback. We'll use this as we go forward, and we're going to move on to our next slide, which is talking about the mapping of our data literacy competencies to the ACRL framework. So to establish this conversation, we want to share several assumptions that we have used in our recently published proposed mapping. We extend the term information need to data need. The competencies that we developed did not originate based on the framework. And so the concepts we present extend across multiple ACRL frames in our mapping. We approached our interpretation from the lens of how business students would apply the frames in their professional lives, as we believe higher education settings where the framework is taught should speak to the contexts where students will apply their learning, as well as within the classroom. And the business data literacy competencies were designed for students to prepare for professional expectations. So when we discuss the context, the competencies both look outward to the professional roles that students will have and inward to their learning within the classroom.
So now we want to dive into the mapping. The frame authority is constructed and contextual highlights that authority or trustworthiness of an information source depends on many factors, such as who created it, why it was created, and how it's being used. Information, important to this frame is an acknowledgement that there are biases within information sources. There's biases in the availability of information and biases of the worldview of both the content creator and the content user. We've mapped this frame to two of the business data literacy competencies: understanding data used in business context and evaluating the quality of data sources. Data used in business environments often varies from data that's used in scholarship. It differs in several ways. The context around collection and use may be different. The recognition of authoritative voices is distinct, and the systems for establishing trustworthiness, authority, and credibility are unique. For business research, for example, authorship will often be held by an organization instead of an individual or a group of individuals. And the publication type might be annual reports or market analysis. It is the credentials of the organization that are evaluated for establishing authority and credibility of these resources. Accordingly, sources for business data can be challenging to evaluate because of the proprietary nature of much of the data, which leads to a lack of transparency about the context around how it was created, collected, and analyzed. In terms of the role of business professionals who are creating data within an organization, creating quality data not only is beneficial for the successful business operations, but it also builds in the quality assurance into the data for secondary use for future users. Exposing business students to commonly used business databases, which are subscribed to by libraries and also corporate entities alike, furthers the conversation about authority in the context of data literacy. Due to the high subscription costs, students and librarians might only have access to one or two choices of data to examine, but the librarian can help establish the conversation about authority, how authority and credibility are determined. Moving on to the next frame, information creation as process. This emphasizes the format of information sources, the modes of delivery, and the process for creating and publishing information sources. The various formats and modes of delivery of information offer different value, evoke different perceptions, and are designed for different audiences. We can use this frame to look at data as a type of format. We've mapped this frame to one business competence.
Ladies, we just lost sound again.
How are we doing?
I can barely hear you.
How are we doing now?
Not much better.
Okay. Apologize for the sound issues. Let's see.
Now I can hear.
Now you can hear?
Yes.
Okay. So depending on one's role in an organization, the value of business data may lie in the interpretation and presentation of that data, or in the original organization and storage of data. Responsibilities for different stages of the data lifecycle often align with different processes for an organization within an organization. The person who reads and interprets raw data might be different than the individual who makes decisions from those interpretations. Professionals benefit from understanding the basic concept about how data are created, organized, and stored before the point at which the data can be analyzed, interpreted, summarized, and presented. Business librarians can introduce business students to the data lifecycle. Students don't have to become experts in every stage of the data lifecycle, but the goal is to help them understand the journey that data takes from being generated to being presented to being reused for secondary analysis. This can help students contextualize their future interactions with data, and how data is when they're employees, how they're working with it, how they're using it, and how they might be able to affect larger decisions in their organization around how data is stored, created, organized, and used. Moving to our third frame, information has value. This addresses.
Sorry, but you got far away again.
Okay. It's a new computer for us, so we apologize. This is this is only a day 4 of testing out the volume on this, so we do apologize for this.
Okay, you're better now. Thank you.
Okay. Yep. The information has value addresses the power of information by highlighting its legal, societal, and economic value, and how this value can impact the production, dissemination, and use of information. The value of information is contextual. When extrapolated to the often proprietary nature of data for business use, value comes from data contributing to an economic and strategic edge. So we have mapped this frame to 3 of the data literacy competencies: understanding data used in business context, data-driven decision-making, and data ethics and security. So data is an asset of financial value. In business context, data has a real currency in terms of profit, operations, logistics, and beyond. When a business can access better quality data and more data, it's more likely that they can apply this data to make decisions, decisions that ideally will increase profit and help the company achieve their goals and mission. The value of data is further emphasized in making decisions, in data-driven decisions. While often the role of management or leadership, decisions are made at many levels in an organization. So there are some people who make decisions around what kind of data is created, how it's collected, how it is analyzed, and how it is used. And then just as new data introduced can help you make new decisions, new interpretations can also change the outcomes of those decisions. Significant to here is also the legal value of data, including intellectual property and attribution, and the social value of data, including the intention and use of data. Businesses need to look at the value of ethical and secure data in terms of how ethical and secure data can benefit their reputation, customer loyalty, and marketing. Students can start to see this concept play out in the classroom as they rely on access to data through campus library subscriptions. Librarians can discuss the value, cost, and ethics of access of data. Just as different universities have access to different subscriptions, different businesses are going to have access to different kinds of data.
So moving along to the frame research as inquiry, this frame draws upon transferable ideas, emphasizing that research is an iterative process of asking questions, exploring findings, and engaging with the information, even though this may look different in business contexts. The collection, interpretation, and application of data is an integral part of the iterative cumulative process of all research. So in mapping this to the business data literacy competencies, we selected interpreting data and data-driven decision-making to work with this frame. Interpreting data involves engaging with data, understanding the purpose and the context of the data, and the interpretation of data takes on distinctive significance in research for business operations because those interpretations help inform data-driven decisions. Also, we can look to decision-making as iterative and driving business research, each decision leading to new questions, new data needs, and additional decision-making. An example that we can connect this back to our practice as librarians is the librarian can contextualize data in a non-academic scenario by highlighting business practices that mirror the research inquiry process. One example of this is the iteration is a foundation of lean startups and is often used in entrepreneurial endeavors in which professionals will try something, change or modify what they are doing based on data and or other information and experience, and adapt something new to maintain the progress. Our penultimate frame, that's funny, sorry. ACRL Information Literacy Frame is Scholarship as Conversation. And we define this frame professionally as underscoring that the body of academic and professional literature is a product of many voices and diverse perspectives participating in a back and forth discussion across time and across spaces. And that scholarship is an open and participatory exchange of ideas. Mapping this to the business data literacy competencies, we selected evaluating the quality of data sources and communicating and presenting effectively with data for the mapping. An important piece of the conversation is how to tell a story with data through effective communication and presentation. For example, Another topic relating to the quality of data resources is that private businesses can be less transparent than public companies. An example, they're not required to publish annual or quarterly reports, as we're familiar with. So the conversation, quote unquote, can become biased towards public companies in assessing data. But the access to data sources and the ability to evaluate and assess the quality of data that bolsters the conversation, however, if available data privileges public companies, then it can create a power inequity in terms of transparency and access to data. An example of how we can relate this back to our practice as librarians is that we can openly converse about the differences between research in business and research in scholarly pursuits. The framework naturally tends to lean heavily towards academic language, and while the knowledge practices and dispositions have a broader application, the narrative portion of the frames does not always speak to the professional lens. The frame scholarship as conversation can be interpreted broadly and have valuable learning outcomes, such as helping students to learn and share and demonstrate ideas through skilled presentation. And finally, we are at searching as strategic exploration. Frame we define as emphasizing the search process in a complex, systematic journey, contextualized by the worldview of the searcher, the scope of the investigation, and the context of the information need. It involves understanding the scope of research before undertaking it and outlining the tasks required to achieve the outcome. We've mapped this to data storage and data organization and storage and understanding data used in business contexts. Data organization and storage is foundational to beginning the exploration of data. To explore data, it must have been collected or generated, organized, and stored. And if the data is not securely stored, cannot be located, or is not or are not well documented, then time and money will be lost having to recreate the data if recreation is possible. Secondly, identifying who produces data and what kinds of data they produce helps students and employees understand what kinds of documents and data and information are available that can be used and accessed and used. Understanding what is accessible within the scope of one's search is essential when looking for available usable data. Example of how we can connect this back to our practice as librarians is that we can provide exposure to databases, exposure to different kinds of tools for finding and creating data, and discuss the structures and formats in which that data exists. Sometimes there's an inquiry, but there is not an existing data to match that inquiry. And it could be that that data is not being gathered yet, or is not yet in a publishable format, or lives behind a paywall. The business librarian, we as business librarians can discuss what data are available, why some data may have not been created, what decisions can be made with the data that is accessible. This can lead to discussions around the kinds of data or reports that exist, conversations about primary and secondary data, the inequities of data access, and training in the responsible conduct of research. We are now going to move on to our active participation portion but we want to just check in with the chat and see if there are any specific questions before we do so.
I don't see any questions right now, but it was an excellent comment someone made that this is a great contrast to consider academic versus professional life.
Great. So in the chat, there's a link to a Jamboard, and Patty is going to explain what to do with the Jamboard.
Okay. There was another comment in the chat too, I think specific about the frames, about how the short phrases often are intertwined or feel intertwined. I think that as Wendy and I were going through this mapping exercise, we really began to see that and all, but also see how they were related, how they overlapped, how they were distinct. So it was quite educational exercise for us. And so we hope that that maybe some of this will be teased out in this exercise as well that we're doing. So we're using Jamboard. I know that for those who are here at the earlier presentation also use Jamboard, but so hopefully we have some familiarity. So what we've done is we've pulled out the top 3 frames that everyone here, the folks who used the Minty exercise at the beginning, ranked. So the top 3 frames from the ranking where information has value, searching is strategic, and research as inquiry, if I remember correctly. So what we would like for you to do is we want you to think about how you have explored these frames in relation to data literacy in your instruction work. And we're talking about instruction work very broadly. This might be in front of the classroom. This perhaps is a one-on-one consultation. However you define instruction in your own work. But we're already populating, so you've picked up on the exercise. This is great. So we're looking for practical applications, strategies, sharing examples of how or what you've done. We're going to give you about 7 minutes, about five minutes to go through this. We have three boards, so it's the 3 frames. You don't have to use all of them. Do the one that speaks to you. There's also an other Jamboard. So if you get to the 4th page and you feel like you have comments or thoughts, or you want to talk about one of the other frames, go for it. That's what the other board is there for. So we're going to leave you to it. Then we're going to come back and we're going to talk about it. We're going to just have an open conversation and see if we can get a few volunteers to share some thoughts as well.
And it looks like everyone is really jumped in on that first slide. But if you'll note on the Jamboard, you can extend to the other slides as well. So do feel free to participate in any of the 3 or all of the 3 during the next few minutes. And again, the other thoughts are always welcome. Oh, good. It looks like folks are finding all of them. Thank you. Should have brought my banjo to play during it as a gentle interlude while you're working, but I did not. Next time. Mm-hmm.
Mhm. Mhm.
It's just moving around on our screen, not trying to take you for a ride, just observing where things are going. I love the banjo emoji, Nancy, thanks. That made my day. We'll take about 2 more minutes. We appreciate your participation. It's a little bit so folks, stuff doesn't get buried in there.
Mhm.
We're seeing so many, we're making mhm as we see this, so many comments that resonate with our conversations as we have been doing this research, and we're delighted that there's so many good examples to share with us. Thank you.
Mm.
All right. I think we've got some great participation across all the slides, so maybe we can come back together, and we would love to have an active discussion of some of your thoughts. I think let's maybe just start on slide number 1. And again, thank you for sharing. So we have time for maybe 2 or 3 reactions from each prompt, and so we'd love to hear from you, hear your voices. How can I make this better? Sorry, we want to be able to, yeah, well, here, you try. Sorry. We have a brand new computer, and it is not being what I want a new computer to be at the moment. So for slide number 1, it looks like I tried to organize a little bit in that moment. We had some ideas about costs. So if anyone wants to unmute, we could use help from the moderator because we can't see the hands. We're having an issue with our screen visibility. So if anyone has a hand raised, if the moderator could help call on them. But it looks like we have a lot of great commentary on looking at the cost.
And you can also pop comments in chat. Looks like
Yes.
you might have a hand raised.
Yeah. Oh, Allison.
Allison, go ahead and unmute. Yeah.
Hi, Wendy. Hi, Patty.
Hi. Nice
Hi.
to see you, Allison.
This is a really great presentation. I just want to make a comment that every time I went to put something in this slide, someone else had already put what I was going to say. Because I think all of us struggle with some of these similar things where we want students to see just how much the resources cost, and talking about value in terms of cost is really what gets through, especially to the undergrads. If you start talking about value in sort of ambiguous terms, it doesn't really resonate. But if you start talking about like dollar figures and percentages and numbers, it's like, whoa, I didn't realize you're spending millions, to get me, or thousands to get me this research report. So I really appreciate this question. And I think it has to be a conversation that we have with students every time we go in and meet with classes or on a one-on-one level. So yeah, kudos to this question and mapping these 2 things together. They're really important. Thank you.
Thanks. And it looks like in the chat, just thank you, Allison, so much. plus ones for what you're saying. And then also, you know, in terms of that they're business students, so they're sort of coming at it from a different perspective when it relates to cost, maybe than other disciplines. And also having Jennifer mentions that she has students or estimate the cost of a report to see what they would assess it to be. And it's often well under the actual cost. And so that usually gets some gasps from the audience. And Jennifer mentions that current students that have, I tell current students that have students who have graduated, that the students who graduated wish that they could still access information so they could take advantage. And the library pays all this money so that they have access to it as part of their enrollment. And I concur with that. Just last week, I had 2 students both ask me how long they could access PitchBook after they graduated, because they see lots of value in it for them as students.
We have another hand up from Juliet. Too.
Yeah, Juliet, please go, please.
Thanks. And thanks so much for your presentation. I find it really helpful because I'm often focused on the practicality of lesson planning. And so to have the mapping done is really sweet. So thank you very much. So my comment was about some exploration I've done with talking with students about data-driven decision-making. And it was just a practical suggestion that I've found works well is I'll start with a grab question, often in marketing classes, which is a poll of who do you think buys the most, and then whatever product, and it's a multiple choice. And we use the question to then talk the answers, which sometimes they get it right, guessing the demographic. But I use the question to help discuss the value of data, to use it as evidence, to make our recommendation for business opportunity based on data. Or if we didn't guess the question answer right, we can use it to say, well, you know, we weren't right about what we thought. And luckily we use data to then guide and inform our decisions. So that's a practical piece that I've found works well in the online environment when I'm talking about data-driven decision-making. Thanks again.
Oh, thank you, Juliet. We appreciate your feedback. We're gonna, in the interest of time, move on to the second frame, but I'll say that in our research, we cited a lot of wonderful work by our colleagues across the profession, and several articles have noted that information has value, particular to us as business librarians who work in this space on a regular basis, that we often find that that's the frame we are utilizing most in our work, or that we feel most natural to our subdiscipline of librarianship. So there's some wonderful literature out there that talks about the frames in business librarianship. So it's interesting to see our feedback today, how that aligns with some of the conversations.
Yeah, so thank you for your comments. I think that again, like looking at the cost is, you know, as value, and then thank you for that great example of value and decision making. I think that's great for in the classroom.
So moving on to our slide about research as inquiry. Jen, if any volunteers want to share their comments in the chat, or feel free to raise your hand. I'm trying to assess and read them simultaneous with you. But finding the sourcing, original sourcing of the data can be really hard to understand. And a lot of times we're working with analyst reports that we're not sure where the data necessarily came from. Like my students often ask about things like, how did PitchBook figure out all of this information, or where did IBIS World get this all from? They don't have a reference page. And that's an interesting conversation. So that point about finding the original source and methodology is important. What one were you, what did you know, Patty?
Just the same.
Yeah. Any other thoughts related to the research's inquiry?
Hi, this is Jennifer. My thought on this one is there's so much information out there. It's easy to get overwhelmed. So when I think of information as inquiry, it's a good idea to help students sort of get a better sense of what specific reports or specific data, what is that useful in answering, like get a better understanding perhaps of like, what is it that they're actually looking for? Because sometimes students have like very sort of broad or vague, inquiries. And there is so much information that sharing the information that's available can kind of help them formulate their questions a little bit better. Thank you.
Thank you. We have about 5 minutes left, so we're going to move on to our third Jamboard slide. Move these around a little bit so we can read them, which was searching a strategic exploration. And it looks like some folks are designing workshops to better showcase the unique databases to allow for more hands-on. Let's see, working with students to look for customer survey data and how they explore the interpreted data that they have out of databases. Organizing databases into categories such as for companies, industries, and consumers. And I often do that too, because not all businesses are created the same, and all those different company research tools have different angles, and some of them are really good at private businesses, some are good at public businesses, some of them are good at global entities versus domestic companies. And when students don't know that there's different ways to categorize businesses and different tools that research specific businesses better. Any additional thoughts on the searching a strategic exploration that anyone would like to share in the chat? Or looks like ECHELTON, you have your hand up. Sorry.
Yeah. Hi, can you all hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. Hi, my name is Eric Helton. So I'm a relatively new business librarian. But one thing I've found very useful, especially if I only have 20 minutes for single course instruction and I'm really trying to reach students, is showcasing a LibGuide that shows different exercises or different pathways to collect specific types of information to really highlight how different databases have different search features. And I think that gives them a great understanding of the database and why different databases have different types of information that would be valuable to their research, especially if they combine it.
Great, thank you. We have 2 minutes left. Should we wrap up, Patty?
Yeah, I want to thank everyone who shared during this conversation, both on the Jamboard and who came in and spoke at really good comments. And I love this Jamboard, so interesting to me. So I want to appreciate it. We'll make sure it's available with the slides too. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah. So just to wrap up, we tried to create a takeaway to help with today's conversation. So we have a research guide, which I think we've shared in the chat, which has links to the research we've done, as well as that what do you call it? Table, sorry, brain freeze for a second there. Our table that we developed mapping or explaining the data literacy competencies, as well as we have a number of resources that we have found helpful in both our education and research, and as we've been doing our work as business librarian and a data management librarian is so we have a section here on data literacy in libraries and a section on kind of business conversations about data literacy in the workplace, because that's informed a lot of our research and understanding where professional spaces are thinking about data literacy and how that correlates back to what we teach in the classroom as librarians to help students prepare to enter that phase and those roles in their life. So hopefully you'll find this helpful, and we'd love to hear more from you. And we do thank you again today for your participation. And if you want to reach out to us, do feel free to contact us via email or both on some Twitter for now. Who knows? But we really enjoyed you. And thank you again so much to the hosts for today for organizing this wonderful 2-day symposium and for all the wonderful talks that we are getting to listen to. So much appreciated.
Thank you, ladies. I've certainly enjoyed this, and thank you for all the hard work of mapping everything for us. I really appreciate that, and makes me think about it a lot differently than I did before. We'll have another 15-minute break.